Well, hello there, watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages as they come in. Time then to see what is making the headlines with The Guardian's chief political correspondent, Jessica Elgot, and the Daily Telegraph's deputy political editor, Lucy Fisher. Great to see both of you. As ever, front pages first, though. Let's start with The Telegraph, quoting the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid's warning that NHS waiting lists won't begin to get shorter until at least 2024. The Times reports that Boris Johnson has been issued a warning by MPs that his plans to clear the backlog aren't ambitious enough. According to the Eye, 1 million more children look set to go hungry as the cost of living crisis continues. The Financial Times has word of BP voicing its opposition to a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies. The Guardian reports on a group of Conservative MPs who are accused of trying to derail the government's own green agenda. And the Metro has the latest on the court case involving footballers' wives Rebecca Vardy and Colleen Rooney. Well, quick reminder that by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. So let's get the very latest from our guests tonight, Jessica Elgot and Lucy Fisher. Welcome to both of you. Let's go straight to the Financial Times in this mini reshuffle. What were the highlights for you then, Lucy?
Well, for me, I think one of the most interesting moves was Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's been made Minister for Brexit Opportunities at the Cabinet Office. He said previously that it would take half a century for the country to realise the benefits of leaving the European Union. Boris Johnson has made clear to him today that that is to be sped up drastically. So he's been tasked with coming up with an action plan of identifying 1,000 EU regulations that still exist within UK law that can be torn up in a big blitz of red tape. What's interesting about the FT story is they pick up on some concerns, not least from the International Chamber of Commerce, warning that actually, whether it's consumers, businesses or civil society, it's not necessarily wanted to see a big bonfire of regulations. The head of the International Chamber of Commerce makes the argument that in this country, people value high standards and that needs sharp regulation to keep those in place. But I think the government is very aware that during the EU campaign, it was promised that Brexit would make life better daily for citizens as well as for businesses. And so far, the changes we've seen have just been very symbolic in nature. Things like restoring the crown symbol to pint glasses. And the Prime Minister is anxious to make it clearer to people how Brexit will benefit them day to day.
And the accusation, I suppose, is that many of the difficulties of Brexit have been hidden behind the problems of the pandemic. And it comes, doesn't it, as not only the Northern Ireland Protocol is at issue, many people, importers and exporters, talking about the paperwork, the new customs rules, the queues we've seen at ports. So there's a lot to look at here, isn't there, Jessica?
Yeah, I think there is, and it strikes me that Jacob Rees-Mogg has been given 2 briefs, actually. He's also the Minister for Government Efficiency, which are incredibly difficult. I mean, at the beginning, when the title was announced, was some sort of scoffing in Westminster that it was kind of an invented job. But Brexit Opportunities, is a tricky one for all the recent reasons that you and Lucy mentioned. I mean, the Cabinet Office produced to mark the anniversary last week, a really weighty document, which was supposed to, all the great things we've done since we left the EU. And a lot of it was incredibly thin. I mean, it got very little coverage in the end. And at the moment, most of the, talks of bonfires of red tape, well, a lot of businesses have seen hugely increased red tape since Brexit. It's caused a lot of extra bureaucracy and government efficiency. I mean, getting hold of Whitehall's procurement policies. It's not something I would have necessarily associated with Jacob Rees-Mogg's talents, but again, something, that maybe he feels strongly about, working from home, Whitehall, civil servants, etc. So it'll be interesting to see how he avoids these bear traps in his new position.
Metro also covering this story as well. Lucy, I don't know if we've got the full page actually, but it's a great photograph of the Lithuanian Prime Minister nearly walking straight past the door, which is just still above. Oh, it's just above that. Anyway, we've cut it off. Never mind. Another time. But meanwhile, Johnson shuffles the pack to ease the party's hangover. Lots of mention of Mark Spencer becoming leader of the House while he himself is under investigation. But any notables about this? Lots of the word he shuffle and everything because there's not that many women involved.
Well, that's right. I think it's interesting today that no one got sacked. It was a lot of sideways shuffles. And in the case of Mark Spencer, Labour criticising him being moved into yet another cabinet position, moving to Jacob Rees-Mogg's old role as Commons leader, given that he is under investigation for allegedly being involved in telling Nusrat Ghani, a former transport minister, that Muslimness had been raised as an issue when when it was discussed that she would be fired from that role and return to the backbenches. So the opposition seizing on that and suggesting the government isn't taking that inquiry seriously by keeping him in the cabinet. I think generally it just shows that Boris Johnson, hasn't had the authority to be able to kick people out from his front bench. He's had to sort of try and accommodate everyone. He can't afford to annoy further MPs and risk any more people joining the revolt against him. And as you say, there's been a lot of criticism today that this is the he shuffle or the men shuffle. It really has been mainly male figures in the top ranks and a few women latterly added to the roster later in the day, but only after that criticism had really seasoned hold. So I think it's only a mini reshuffle. I don't think there will be hugely rebounding effects from it, but certainly it does raise scrutiny about Boris Johnson's attitude towards some of the female talent in his party.
And meanwhile, the other focus of government today was the issue of waiting lists, the NHS reset plan, and the depressing news that we've got at least another 2 years of rising numbers on those waiting lists, Jessica, before it starts to get better, despite more money being thrown at the issue.
Yes, and Sajid Javid's making the point in Lucy's paper that actually there is very little that government can do, and of course it's convenient for Sajid Javid to make this point. But he sets out a reasonably persuasive one, that because the backlogs are so high, because so many people stayed away from the NHS during the pandemic when they didn't feel it was an emergency, there will be long waiting lists. Even with this increased investment, and people are probably going to be expecting to see significant results because we're all getting a tax rise in April. They're expecting that by 2024, 99% of patients will be waiting less than a year. I mean, that's still making a year that target still makes people will probably still make people flinch quite a bit, and with some of the dire warnings that we've seen about the state of the cancer waiting lists on the front of pages in the run up to this plan, and speaking to people in government, I think that they really do feel like this, and perhaps even more than the cost of living crisis, maybe even, dare I say it, more than parties, is going to be the issue that could really mean that the party comes a cropper at the next election.
And top of the Times as well, Johnson accused by his own MPs of... Oh, hold on a second, I'm reading the wrong one there. Is that the... I'm just trying to read it. It's so tiny for me. Oh, Tories push PM to act faster on waiting lists. Do apologise. That was my problem. Yes, so what do you think of the plan as outlined today, Lucy? Will it tick things over faster? What struck you as actually fixing some of this issue, which feels insurmountable for many people waiting depressingly for not even being seen at the start of their treatment programmes?
Well, I think there are reforms in this plan that will make a difference within, several years' time. That includes things like a new web platform, so people have all their information at the touch of a fingertip. They can see where they are in the queue. New one-stop shops for cancer tests in shopping malls and football stadiums. Also new surgical hubs for getting operations done quicker, things like knee operations, hip replacements, cataracts. So I think that there are some good ideas in this, but I do think that the timetable will be a worry to many in the Conservative Party and in the government. As Jess says, this is looking at getting waiting lists starting to come down in 2024. Well, that seems awfully close to the next election for the Conservative Party to start making any difference. And I think obviously the paper today comes after a delay. We know there's been rows between the Department for Health and Social Care and the Treasury. The Treasury has been concerned that, they want to see the most stretching targets possible and value secured for the £5.9 billion capital investment that the health service is getting. I think there's just increasing concerns that the health service is sucking up ever bigger portions of day-to-day spending as well by the state. And some people worry that it's just a bottomless pit into which money is poured, and yet, things never seem to get better. So I think there are some good ideas in there, but the time it will take for these to take effect is potentially concerning.
Yes, and without social care bit being fixed, people stay in hospital longer than they would do. That's always been part of the problem, hasn't it? But the other issue as well, front page of the Eye, Jessica, this cost of living crisis, talking now about children going hungry and whether, in fact, the issue of free school meals could be changed, whether that could be reset itself to offer school meals to more families.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question and one that has been, obviously controversial in the party. I mean, one of Boris Johnson's biggest adversaries in the first year of the pandemic was Marcus Rashford, the footballer who campaigned so passionately on free school meals and extending them over the school holidays. I mean, in fact, that's something that people have argued should be the case, even outside the extraordinary situation of a pandemic. And I think now that we're obviously seeing really significant pressures on family bills, amongst people who just don't have that extra give, potentially a tax rise, potentially, obviously seeing the effects of inflation, seeing the effects on energy bills. I mean, there are mitigations to help some of the most vulnerable families, but ultimately it still looks like people will go, out of pocket. And therefore, is it about looking at how to, more steps to help, that extra category of vulnerable people that will be pushed into that poverty because of the extra pressures?
Lucy, you must study these things. Is it always this hard to be Prime Minister? I mean, I know, we go way back and you've had the financial crisis, then Brexit, and then the pandemic, and now we've got this massive cost of living issue. I mean, it's no fun in politics, is it, when the stakes are so high on every subject?
Well, I think you're right, but I also think, in a way, during the pandemic, it led to the suspension of politics as normal. We saw the Conservatives leading the polls for such a long time during the COVID crisis. I think in part because the public gave the government a bit of a break. People recognised that this pandemic sweeping the world was a novel virus. It was a pretty unprecedented situation. And even if there were missteps taken, that, the government was probably trying its best. So I think people largely gave Boris Johnson the benefit of the doubt. I do think things are going to be much tougher as this year goes on, with the cost of living squeeze, with energy bills going up in April, just at the same moment that national insurance contributions are set to rise, council tax is set to rise, the personal income, the personal allowance and the income tax thresholds are going to be frozen, inflation is soaring. It's going to be a really, really tricky time. And I think this Eye front page brings out, some of the worst off people who could be hit. 1 million more children could go hungry. That's just an astounding number. And I think, again, when you put that against some of the other headlines around tonight, BP headed for 8-year record high in profits, I think that there will be more pressure on the government to try and redistribute some funds to make sure that the hardest up in society don't go without.
Well, fascinating anyway, but you're right, it's massive and seismic issues for all families, isn't it, this subject, as we roll through the next year. Coming up, there are some Tory MPs trying to undermine their own government's green agenda. We will talk about that and more after this break. Watching the press preview. With me once again, Jessica Elgot and Lucy Fisher. Welcome back to both of you. So let's go to The Guardian, shall we? Tory MPs accused of trying to drag the climate fight into a new culture war. This is after Rishi Sunak gave fulsome backing to North Sea oil and gas as a means of transitioning our way through this. Jessica, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that that this is a group that has had some publicity, especially because many of them were key figures in the Brexit fight, including Steve Baker, and have drawn on some of the tactics that they used in order to get publicity for opposing Theresa May's Brexit deal. But I think that one of the interesting things about this story is how senior climate scientists are saying that they're very worried about the pressures of this group and how they believe that they're having an effect in shifting government opinion. I mean, they are small in number, but there's a number of quite effective operators in there, as well as Baker, people like Steve Halfon and others, and I think that there's a lot of Tory MPs will tell you that they're really on board with the climate fight. Boris Johnson seems particularly personally involved in it, and there's even been another group set up to try and counter this group, so the sort of net zero support group or something, I think it's called. But I think one of the things that is pretty significant about this story is the influence that the scientists perceive they're having, and it's like the examples are like the ones that you gave with Rishi Sunak.
Very quickly, Lucy, your thoughts on that? I mean, a lot of these people are very familiar to the old Brexit research group, aren't they, by the look of them?
Well, that's right. And I was also struck last week by the suggestion that Nigel Farage, another leader of the Brexit movement, said that, for his next move in politics, he was potentially interested in getting involved on a referendum on net zero. I think the argument a lot of these skeptics are using is that it's all very well for Britain to make really ambitious targets about phasing out fossil fuel cars or replacing gas boilers with heat pumps. But really, it's a drop in the ocean when you look at the kind of major pollution coming out of China, where they're still using coal-fired power stations, some of the pollution coming out of the US and other developed nations. They argue it shouldn't fall so disproportionately on the shoulders of UK consumers when they're facing a cost of living crisis.
Jessica, we've only left you 10 seconds for your favourite story, which is on the front of the Metro. Very, very quickly. You'll have to do it later, but tell us more.
I mean, it's just a fantastic story with so many details about this Wagatha Christie between the two footballers' wives where it went ugly. And I just urge you to all read the details about how phones were dropped in the North Sea. It's really spectacular.
Well, Jessica and Lucy, thank you both very much indeed.